Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. Today I'll be taking a look at Spiderman Maximum Carnage from LJN and see if it is indeed still one of the best games from that studio. Also be sure to wait until the end for a sneak peek at the next episode. But for now, let's take a trip back to 1994. If you were a gamer of the 90s, then you may remember the name LJN and how they were known for making games that some would say were the worst of the worst. A lot of these would be multiple licensed titles such as movie tie-ins for Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and True Lies. They would also be the studio behind multiple WWF games that were released during the Sega and Nintendo era. While a lot of these would be known as being notoriously bad for having terrible controls, there was one license that LJN had which wasn't always bad. I'm of course talking about the Marvel games. Sure, they had some games that were just downright awful like Spider-Man and X-Men, but one game that always sticks out among gamers is Maximum Carnage. It would release in 1994 on the SNES and Sega Genesis with special red cartridges, but I would like to see if it truly was one of the best games from LJN, as many people would say. This is one of those games where I always thought the crossover was one of the best ever in games, comic books, cartoons, because back in the 90s we had a lot of crossovers in the comic book cartoons, but not really in the movies because there weren't a whole lot of comic book movies at the time. So the story for this game follows that of the comic book from the same name, which released just a year prior to this, and is told through a comic book style set of panels for the cutscenes. Cletus Cassidy becomes Carnage and uses his power to break out of prison and cause nothing but, well, you guessed it, carnage, through the streets of New York City. It is then up to Spider-Man and Venom to stop Carnage from causing any more damage than he already has, but they will need all the help they can get, with other superheroes such as Captain America and Iron Fist joining the fight. Now, I thought that was kind of cool that they did that, and I really want to get into the gameplay and discuss more on those heroes and how they play a part in this game. The gameplay is your typical beat-em-up style game similar to Streets of Rage or Final Fight. You play as both Spider-Man and Venom, however you don't get to choose your characters until about the third or fourth mission when things go south for Spider-Man after he's knocked off a building. Also, like many arcade games, you do get specials in this game in two forms, which I think are pretty cool. The first one being the Power Punch, where your health bar fills up the more you defeat enemies, and then you can pull off a Power Punch which will knock out an enemy in one hit. But what's cool about this is that when you punch enemies, it has that comic book feel, and text bubbles will pop up on the screen saying Power Punch, which feels like text bubbles that say BAM, POW, ZIP, and CRUNCH. I thought this was a cool addition because yeah, Batman had it in the Adam West version, but you really hadn't seen this in a video game at the time, and then the game Comic Zone would actually implement this years later. And then the other form that I thought was cool is what I meant when I said Spider-Man and Venom would need all the help they can get. Your other special power is pretty much other superheroes coming into the rescue to help you out. In certain situations, you may need to clear out an entire room of enemies, so you can call in Captain America or Iron Fist or Black Cat to come in and just wipe out the entire screen. There's even one point in-game where it's scripted and Cloak and Dagger will show up to help you after you've been beaten by enemies in one level. I thought it was game over when I first played that section, and then I realized when they came in it was actually just helping me. And there's a lot of fake outs in this game too with the gameplay, where you think it's a game over and it's actually not. But that leads me into the environments of this game. The game takes place across two areas, San Francisco and New York City. You start off as Spider-Man in the New York City levels, just fighting your way through the streets trying to figure out what is going on. Around the third or fourth mission though is when things go south for Spider-Man, as I mentioned before, and the game shifts over to Venom, who is going through San Francisco when he sees that Carnage is loose and he knows that he must stop him. Now here's where things get interesting when you choose your character. You can go through the entire game as either Venom or Spider-Man, but there are certain levels that you won't get to see, such as the Statue of Liberty level and the Midtown area that Spider-Man fights in. I always choose Venom when this happens, and he always gets captured by Carnage, and there's basically a cutscene going on of Venom being tortured by Carnage with the sonic boom gun, but then you'll see Spider-Man, he'll have a thing that says, meanwhile, here's what Spider-Man was doing, and he'll be fighting through the streets, and 3 different levels that he's going through, and he's fighting bosses, enemies, other heroes are jumping in to help him. And then the same thing happens if you choose Spider-Man. You see what Venom is going through, and he's going through the Statue of Liberty fighting those characters and doing all that stuff basically on the autopilot mode. Now, I thought this was an interesting mechanic they added to the game because at this time, I hadn't seen a game that let me play both sides of the story like this, and it wasn't until years later that Resident Evil 2 would give me that option to play both sides of the story to see what this is what this character was doing, this is what this character is doing during the story. And I just thought that was really cool that they added that in there. I will say that the levels in this game do feel very familiar to those found within Batman Returns for the SNES, as well as the Death and Return of Superman. The characters do look very much like a comic book, which I am not complaining about because I love how the character sprites look in the game, and I feel that it was a lot better than Separation Anxiety, which felt like it was very watered down, and that was the follow-up game to this one. And all the character sprites felt very watered down because it was made by Acclaim, and they're known for just rushing their games out without even proofreading it or anything like that, if that makes sense. They just kind of throw them out the door and here you go, it's done, which is why a lot of Acclaim games were not very good. They were just rushed. I mean, look at all the Simpsons games. But as we come to the end of this video, I would like to give my final thoughts on what I think about this game itself. This was definitely one of the toughest video games of the 90s, and many fans will tell you that it was. And if it wasn't for the LJN logo on the front of the box, then you might not have even known that they were responsible for this game, which I did not know for many years that they were responsible for this game. I cannot recommend this game enough though, especially if you're a Spider-Man fan or a Marvel fan in general, and want to play any and all games released by them. Also, playing the game with cheat codes will help you out a lot if you get stuck in certain parts, because you only get 1 or 2 continues per game, and once that's it, it's game over, and some of these levels can get pretty hard trying to get through them. But I will say that a physical copy is a bit on the pricey side these days, especially more for the red cartridge, though I have seen it for a reasonable price in the past, which is rare for retro games in these days. And with that, we come to the end of the episode for Maximum Carnage. Have you played this game before? If so, which version of the game do you prefer, the Sega Genesis or the Super Nintendo version? Let me know down in the comments below. I would like to thank you again for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I always enjoy making these videos because it gives me a chance to revisit the past and introduce these older games to a newer audience who might be interested in trying them out for themselves. But it also gives me a chance to bring back the memories to those older fans who used to play these games back in the 90s and early 2000s, such as myself. But as always, guys, be sure to hit that thumbs up and ring that bell to be notified of when videos go live. Share with your friends and family, and I'll see you next time. But before we do that, let's check out what's going on in the next episode.